So I would like to do two things to make this feel like a workshop and not a keynote presentation, because I'm going to be doing a keynote presentation in the morning and I'm going to be preaching on Sunday, so I didn't want this to feel, presentish. I want it to feel more workshop. So two ways I'm doing that is I'm not standing up at the big kahuna podium. I'm standing down here amongst the people. Okay? And the second thing, would like to ask if you could kind of come close so we could feel more like we're not in a huge kind of room like that. And I know we're church people, so there's back row people, back pew sitters. So I would like to get started. My name is Ben Guess, and I am from the national office in Cleveland. Elizabeth Dilley called it the mothership a few seconds ago. We prefer to call it the church house, and the UCC used to be in New York at the national offices and moved to Cleveland, and those from the conference who've served on national boards make their way to Cleveland a lot. I could complain about cloudy weather, but I know that those of you who live in the western part of the conference know a lot more about cloudy weather, but Cleveland claims to be one of the cloudiest places, but I know that you got us beat out here, so we praise God for the sunshine today. I'm the executive minister of Local Church Ministries, which is one of the 4 national covenant ministries, and our work is, as the name suggests, focused on the work of local churches and trying to strengthen the work of local churches, particularly around supporting best practices in local churches, evangelism, reaching out to newcomers, hospitality, excellence in worship and education, preaching resources. How many pastors in the room use Weekly Seeds or Samuel or one of those resources that comes from us? How many read the daily devotional that comes from the Still Speaking Writers Group? One of the most popular things we do. That's from Local Church Ministries. We do resource publication, the books of Pilgrim Press that hopefully you're purchasing from time to time, Sunday school curriculum and other faith formation resources, and other works. So you kind of get the general impression. I'm new to this position. I've been a UCC pastor for about 24 years and spent the first 12 in parish ministry in Kentucky. I usually have to tell a couple of Kentucky stories at some point, so you'll hear some of those along the way. I'm a native Kentuckian, and I've spent the last 12 years in exile in northern Ohio and working in the national staff. I've worked in communications most of that time. Was glad to see my friend Mary Stamp in the room. We worked together as editors in United Church News, and then I went on to be the community director of publishing, identity, and communications for the denomination. So my love for the local church and my time in parish ministry brought me back into this work as the executive minister of Local Church Ministries. I'd like to begin by just asking you in the room, if you could just pop up answers to this question. What are some of the main ingredients in church life that you think formed your faith? What are the things that formed your faith?
Confirmation.
Music. Music? Worship? Camp?
Camp.
Yes? Yes? The liturgy. Lives of the saints.
Service.
Hymns. Hymns.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. Exactly. Potlucks.
Community service. Confirmation. Mission trips.
Global Ministries. One of my favorite potluck stories is that a disciples pastor friend of mine told me that it was pastor Park Avenue Church in New York City, and somebody brought that 7-layer salad, you know what that is, in the casserole dish, and put it in the kitchen, and then the people who always go right before the potluck and bake all the casseroles before everyone, they baked the 7-layer salad and put it all out on the table, and it was all eaten by the end of the meal. So. I'm always a little bit leery of church potlucks, actually. My mother-in-law, my partner's mother, when we would visit our church, we would start to pick up something and she would sort of know who in the church had prepared different things. And she would say, just take a little bit of that. But nobody said Sunday school. Sunday school was mentioned. So, well, maybe I didn't hear it because I was a person that wasn't really formed well by Sunday school. It wasn't one of the high points of my life. I certainly went to Sunday school, and it's probably one of the things that did form my faith, but it probably didn't have the pizzazz that some of the other things did. I was one that was deeply formed by my camping experience for many, many summers of going to summer camp. I was formed by preaching. I went to a church that had a reputation of having excellent preachers, and I remember as a young person, maybe I was just a church geek already, but I remember just really being drawn by the sermon moment. And also because when I went home, my parents would always engage and we would talk about the experience of that. I was a musician, so I always grew up doing church music stuff, and I think we would all agree that there are many, many different ways that our faith is formed, and that's what I would like to talk about this afternoon. So, faith formation today, beyond Sunday school. And in the presentation, I'd like to talk about some cultural changes that are facing faith formation. What are some new approaches to faith formation? And I'm going to ask you to help me in naming some of those during some conversation time. And some ideas and some resource sharing of some of the things that I have appreciated in learning new about faith formation. Next slide. Two quotes just to begin by. Well, the first on the bottom is by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who says, "The first service that one owes to others in fellowship consists in listening to them. Just as the love of God begins with listening to God's word, so the beginning of love for the brothers and sisters is learning to listen to them." And that's really what faith formation is about, being able to articulate what it is that we believe, how God is stirring in our lives, and to believe that we can do that in a safe place where people can hear it, can respond to it, and they can respond in a way that we feel affirmed in that, but we're also challenged and stretched in that relationship. And at the top of this slide is a quote that I really like from Doug Paget from Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis, who says, "In the traditional church system, all of the important stuff is reserved for clergy, when all people should be doing it. The entire community should have to do what the pastor is doing. Most pastors stay pastors because they get to do the good stuff." This resonated with me a lot when I left the parish setting and began to work as a church bureaucrat. And I found sort of my spirit lagging, even though I continually went to church on Sunday mornings in the church where I was a member. Because I would somehow stepped away from the discipline of waking up on Monday and reading the text for the next Sunday and starting to think about how I was going to develop the liturgy around that next worship service and how I was going to engage these texts. And as I went throughout all my week, I was encountering every experience thinking, is there a story in there somewhere where I can use this with this text? And I would think about how I was going to decorate the sanctuary and provide a unique interpretation of the altar space so that it became, and so the rhythm of my life was all around helping faith form. And I thought that I was doing that for other people, when in essence, it was a way of faith forming for me. So faith formation today is more in breaking down the experience of doing the stuff that clergy do and parsing it out so that all of us are about doing that work together. Let's take a look at the next slide. Just a current picture of what faith formation looks like in the United Church of Christ right now. We have a group of UCC educational consultants, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about the work that they're doing in national and regional settings that right now are involved in helping us go through a process of learning about what does faith formation look like in the United Church of Christ, and how can we do it better, and how can the connected networks of the church support that. We have partners in education in the conference setting. I know you have partners in education, any of you in the room here, people who are charged with helping. They're the know-it-alls in the room who know about the good curriculum, the good resources. I mean that with all loving intent. They take on the mantle and responsibility of talking about best practices in faith formation and being a resource to congregations so that they can know what's available around resourcing. Certainly in faith formation in the church, local church pastors, our lay leaders, our educators within our local churches are the places where the rubber really does meet the road around education. And also AUSSE, the Association of United Church Educators, it helps us to critique what we're doing, and particularly around the resources that we provide from the national setting, of providing some good critique around that. Next slide. I want you to make note of this URL when you get back home, and can take a look at 3 dialogues that exist on the UCC website. With Doug Padgett, who I just quoted from earlier from one of the emergent congregations, Marcus Borg, many of you know he's from this part of the world. He's in Portland, certainly one of the emergent thinkers Christian faith today, and also of our general minister and president. This is sort of a dialogue that's available on the website that will help you think more about ways to expand Christian faith formation in your own context. Marcus Borg, for example, says that we already live in a culture of indoctrination around what he calls the 3 A's, which are achievement, affluence, and appearance. And that those are the things that we are being indoctrinated about all the time. How to be more and better achievers, how to be more affluent, how to make more money, and how to worry and obsess about our appearance and how we match up against other models of appearance. And he says that in the same way, the church is to provide a counter-indoctrination to what the culture is doing, and that is, he says, is the role of faith formation, to help us ways to think about these 3 A's in different ways. He also talks about in this dialogue an enterprise that he and his wife are engaged in called the Top 25 Stories. And he says it's a great exercise to list for yourself and for your family. If we could only save and preserve 25 stories of the Christian tradition that you think would be most important to pass down to others, what would they be? And he says, for example, the story of the flood, he'd throw it out. He said for him, that's a bad story. It doesn't make the top 25. He said he wouldn't save the story of David and Goliath. He'd throw that story out. He doesn't mention in the dialogue what his 25 actually are, but he says an exercise in faith formation is you to gather with your family and actually wrestle with that topic. What would be the 25 stories of Christian tradition that you would want to preserve? Or even to expand that, what would be the 25 stories in general, Christian and beyond, that you think would, for your spiritual formation, might want to be to continue on? Or an exercise for your church as well. Doug Padgett talks about faith formation as being the entire aspect of community life together as being spiritual formation. And this is certainly what we expressed here. Everything from Sunday school to potluck, from hymn singing to the preaching occasion to going to a movie together, everything that we do as Christian people, annual meetings, everything is an exercise in faith formation. And the need, he says, for us to continually to be renegotiating the story. I kind of like that phrase, renegotiating the story. As he says in his own church experience, people are always arriving with the old story. And so you're always having to renegotiate what is the story of this community of faith, and how will this story be renegotiated again and again so that it can be passed on. Geoffrey Black talks about the rise of the religious right and how they had the microphone for so long that they were able to actually say, this is the story that has been negotiated for Christian faith, and that has propelled in us a counter resurgence of faith formation, because we know intuitively that's not our story. So then it begs the question, well, what is our story, and how can we tell it as well? Next slide. I think we're back up to. I want to talk to you about faith practices. This is a commercial moment here. Faith Practices is a resource that has been developed for the church that takes serious this whole church approach to faith formation, a beyond Sunday school moment. This is an exhaustive, expansive resource. And it is developed around 12 practices of faith. We have now developed 7 of the 12, with the remaining coming online later this year. Do we have any new writers for faith practice in the room that help participate in the writing of this? We actually had 300 writers who participated in developing this resource. And I want to tell you about it because it's a way for you to think about faith formation in a way that certainly reaches beyond Sunday school. You can actually use this in Sunday school, but it's not developed with that intent in mind. And it's around basic practices of faith that we might call like giving and receiving hospitality. The practice of being hospitable is a practice of our faith. Keeping Sabbath, living stewardship, playing and living joyfully, giving testimony and witness, encountering Scripture, praying and making ritual. And in each one of these practices, there is 600 activities that can be utilized within your congregation to help bring this to life. If we'll take a look at the next slide, it actually is broken down into 12 different age categories or groupings within the church. So as we would think about traditional age groupings like young children, older children, all the way through adults. But there's also within this components for worship, music, arts, and stories. So there are like 50 different suggested activities that you could bring keeping Sabbath into your worship time, that hour or so on Sunday morning or whenever you meet for worship. Ways in which to live practices in daily life, 50 activities that you could actually suggest and incorporate for families to experiment for a while, to see how they would reflect upon that and bring that back in there. So faith formation, faith practice is available online at ucc.org/faith practices, and it's available by subscription. The way it works, it costs $300 is the subscription price, but you receive all access to all the faith practices, 600 activities for each practice times 12 forever. And you receive a password that you can share with other members of the congregation, anyone who's teaching, doing any sort of leadership in the church, and it's always available to you online to download each of these. So I want to present that as a commercial opportunity for you. This was developed because we had been in the tradition of always doing Sunday school curriculum that had a linear approach and said, okay, this is what you're supposed to be doing in the fall quarter of 2011. This is what you're supposed to be doing in the spring of 2012. And we said, that's not really the way people live church life. So we wanted something that you could decide, right now our church wants to engage the issue of the practice of hospitality, or we want to engage stewardship for a period of a season. And we want to sort of, as a church community, wrestle with this and reflect on this together. And how could we do that in all different age groups and all different settings? How at the same time that our kiddos are doing it in their time together, could we also be talking about stewardship at choir rehearsal? Is there a way that faith formation can be formed in every different setting of the church? Excellent. So let me tell you what we're engaged in right now from the national setting around faith formation. We had a wonderful Christian educator named Ken Ostermiller who worked for the national setting for many years and did incredible work. He retired in July, and he was responsible for the development of some of our best curriculum, Seasons of the Spirit, the Imaging the Word, a lot of the good stuff that has enriched our life together for a long time, and was engaged in Association for United Church Educators, Partners in Education. And when Ken retired, we thought, we had two impulses. One is we can't do without Ken, we've got to hire someone else. And the second impulse was maybe this is a moment with radical change in the church that we need to do something a little bit different. So we started last summer by hiring a researcher to help us undertake a project that we're calling the Faith Formation Research Project. And we are taking a year and a half time to interview and to gather data from across the United Church of Christ as how does faith formation work in the UCC. What we're hearing from folks already, we have done hundreds of interviews and have done over 1,000 empirical gathering of data, is that we have churches that are developing their own resources. We have pastors and lay leaders that are incredible educators that have developed their own module system that they think is working very well. We have congregations that are using different denominational materials, and we also have denominations that are saying, would you guys in Cleveland please listen to us? This is what we need, not what you have been doing. And so we're in the midst of this study in which we will be coming out in September with findings that will then inform the ways the national church will help to resource you. We have in the past been about spending a lot of our OCWM resources to develop curriculum that we think may not be the way to go. What if perhaps we could provide seed money to local churches that are doing good work and could say, how could we help you develop your curriculum more fully for your congregation in exchange for you turning it back over to us so that we might replicate it and publish it so that it could be used by others. So that really we're moving away from a center of expertise to many, many different centers of expertise, where local churches are the places where faith formation is happening and we're replicating it over and over for others. So our education consultants, we set them out on a task to go interview leaders across the United Church of Christ and to talk about faith formation with congregations that are already vital in faith formation. They're known for that. With seminary professors, deans, and presidents, with youth and young adult leaders, with educational systems beyond seminaries and institutions that were conducting similar research. Our conference resource centers directors, members of the Association of United Church Educators, Partners in Education, the members of the Collegium, the national staff engaging in faith formation work, and the leaders of emerging faith communities that are getting a reputation for doing work like that. So the next slide will say we have 78 of these interviews that have already been conducted, and also with participation of key national staff who are already developing resources as a part of their work. So what I want to talk through quickly next are sort of the 5 things that we're seeing as really driving the impact and change in the way faith formation is being done. And I'll warn you ahead of time, these are not earth-shattering new things that you're going to say, wow, I never thought about that before. This is all sort of it's obvious. But it does speak to what we're sensing. If there's any sense of collective wisdom, it's that what you might be experiencing in your own church and in your own life, even in your own family, is what people across the church are saying the same thing. The first one is technology. The technology has deeply impacted the way in which relationships are formed and navigated in our culture, and has many implications for the church and how we care about the work of faith formation. The broad use of social networking sites and a constant sense of being in communication with increasingly diverse people and ideas is one of the specific phenomena that are making a big impact. So let's take a look at where we are right now as the United Church of Christ engaging technology. And this information comes, in the next slide, from the FACT study, Faith Communities Today, which is a research initiative of the Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, and a study they did on virtually religious, in which they interviewed faith communities across the country, and included, the UCC was included in a part of that larger survey. We know that email among religious groups has expanded substantially. In the last 10 years, 35% of our congregations in 2000 used email. Only 35% in the year 2000. It's hard to believe that now 90%. For many of us, we can't imagine church without our listservs and our communication and our announcement that goes out from there. Congregational websites, there was a time probably 5 or 6 years ago in our communications work with the national setting, we were helping churches to develop websites and at a panic pace, and people were like, we don't have a website, we don't have a website. We've found that has plateaued and even declined the number of churches that maintain a website. Why? It's because we've all moved to Facebook now. And my advice to people who are all anxious about their website presence, I'm like, don't even worry about it. Just skip right over that and go. It's easier, and you'll actually be reaching an audience in a different, perhaps more useful communication tool. Over 40% of all congregations, this was in 2010, said that they use Facebook. And perhaps not surprisingly, the UCC is actually a little bit under that statistic at 35%. And this probably has a lot to do with the demographic makeup of our congregations. Next slide. Visual projection and database software tracking of new members were by far and away the most frequently used new technology in our churches, and over 2/3 of all congregations. This statistic surprised me. That 53% of UCC congregations say that they are using some form of visual projection in their worship service, more than half. Would that be true for the people in this room? If you use some sort of visual projection in your worship service, would you raise your hand?
Every service?
No, not every service, but at some time you do that. I know my church does it once a month, and we call it the green service. And we talk about we're being environmentally responsible, but actually people love it because we sing better, because we're not like this, we're actually looking up. So I'm not sure how much I believe in that particular stat. But not surprisingly, over half of all small congregations are technologically lagging, while almost half of all those, about 250 attenders, are major tech users. They use technology in worship. Our larger churches do it much more often. The UCC is the lowest third of traditions on percentage of congregations that use technology in a major way. The UCC is in the upper middle third of traditions on percentage of congregations that use technology in a marginal way. So we're sort of good at not doing it very well. Is another way of saying it. These figures reflect the size that we are a denomination made largely of small congregations and largely of older member churches. So what do we know from this? We know that the embrace of technology is crucial to reaching new audiences. And it is crucial to the ways in which faith is being formed today. For us in our room, as we named all the different things, perhaps other generations would begin to speak of faith formation happening in an online way, in ways that some of us could not imagine. We tend to think of, in the church, of technology as being a tool, when in fact technology for younger generations is as the air that we breathe. It is just the way of being. But not surprisingly, the research from the FACT study said that faith communities that embrace greater use of technology are almost always perceived as being more spiritually vital than churches that do not use technology. Roughly 50% of faith communities with major tech use said that a lot of their members are involved in bringing others to church. Increased tech use by the smallest and largest size faith communities significantly generated increased per capita giving. We like to think of ourselves in the United Church of Christ as a progressive church. I have a lesbian couple that are very close friends of mine, and their son started worshiping on his own at a really cool church in town on the west side of Cleveland. And so his two moms started asking about this church that he was going to, and he said, it's a very, very progressive church. You would love it. The pastor preaches in blue jeans. They have a rock band. They have 2 big screens up front. They project and they have video in the midst of their service. It is just a really progressive church. And he said, well, do you get a sense of whether we as a lesbian couple would be welcomed there? And he said, well, sure, because the pastor preaches in blue jeans, and they got a rock band, they got big screens in front. I think it's time that we in the United Church of Christ take the word progressive as seriously and as expansive as possible. To think about that not only in the theology that we embrace and we share with one another, but in the tools that we use to reach other audiences. We ask young adults in the UCC from the part of these consultant surveys, and this is what they said to us. What we need to do needs to be online. One person said, I think if there isn't video from an event, it might as well have not ever happened. So let's all wave to the camera over here, as we've mentioned today, as we're online. That the resources must be interactive, online, self-taught confirmation, new member courses, that all of that happens not just in real FaceTime, but also in real FaceTime online. It's important to learn how to reach youth and young adults where they are. Jesus modeled going to the people. It may not be physically going to the people, but meeting them by using familiar technologies. Resources need to be created that meet them where they are at. They need to help young people to be responsible in their use of technology, they ask of us. And the response of the user, youth or young adult, has to shape the core curriculum in order to be seen as authentic, as opposed to a curriculum that appears to have all the answers. So that's the first. Technology's changed our society. Duh. Number 2, generational changes. With new generations come different ways of doing and being in the world. With regard to churches, younger generations are seeking to transform hierarchical, intellectual, specialized structures and programs into collaborative, experiential, organic, and fluid models of faithful living. Churches look differently for these people, and especially in a culture where people are identifying as spiritual but not religious, now more than ever. And we'll talk about that in a second. The fact study, again, the next slide says, over 52% of mainline or old line Protestant churches, of which the UCC is a part, that 1/3 of individuals in their congregations are 65 and older. That's in all mainline churches. 1/3 are above the age of 65. But I don't know if you knew this, the UCC is actually the second oldest of these historical churches, and the United Presbyterians are the only major denomination that is older in their pews, people in our pews, than the UCC. And among the historic mainlines, the UCC is the oldest membership, with more than 33% of our members older than 65. 75% of mainline online Protestant churches have less than 10% of their participants in the age group of 18 to 34. So the generational changes, we look at how do people identify themselves in the spiritual, religious stuff. And there's some good news in here. If we can embrace the spiritual as being who we are and not running from it and saying it's somehow something other than us, there's a good trend in here. Because 34% identify as spiritual and religious, while 23% and a growing number are identifying as spiritual. So that's a good 50 7% of people who identify themselves as spiritual or religious or some way, and then add on another 14% who identify as religious. So what we often hear is that young people, this is a survey of people between the ages of 15 and 25. So it's not as if young people today are not interested in things spiritual and things religious. It is their investment in institutional church is the issue that we need to be talking about. Next slide. So this group of 15 to 25-year-olds were asked, what does it mean to be spiritual? And to pick out of a list, and they came up with these top 3 responses. Is that they define spiritual as believing that there is a purpose to life. And the number 2 response is believing in God. So while we sometimes think of the spiritual equation as being somehow, crystals and, it's rooted in a God-centered understanding of who we are. And number 3, having a deep sense of inner peace or happiness. And only 10% of those surveyed said, I don't think there is a spiritual dimension of life at all. And pushing that a little bit differently, the perceived aspects, and I won't walk through all of these, but I can provide these forms for you later. But what I think is really interesting here, this same group of people were asked that over the last 2 to 3 years, how has their spiritual life changed? And in every single category, how much the blue represents an increase, the green represents about the same, and the red represents a decline in that aspect in their life. And as you can see across the board, youth and young adults are saying how much I have a sense that life has meaning and a purpose, the amount of time I spend helping other people, the importance of my spiritual life, those sorts of indicators they see as expanding in their life. Even if they're not part of an institutional church, they see that expanding. The only one in which we showed a decline was that which has to do with tradition, how much I feel guided by my ancestors or traditions. For those of us in the church who are conservers of tradition, we might do that, and I know we want to pass on what we have been taught and kind of be good guardians of our traditions. But that might actually be interpreted as sort of being rooted in the past rather than being rooted in experience. And we know that a spiritual religious trend today is certainly to take people's real life experiences seriously. So the consultant survey, as the next slide says, we asked youth and young adults, what do you want what do you want faith formation to look like in your church? They said, we want action-oriented stuff, self-starters, non-passive, collaborative. They said that they are book smart already, but they're hungry to know how to be street smart and integrate their knowledge of faith into everyday life. They are both religious and spiritual, and they want to experience God. There's a difference between talking about God and experiencing God, and you've known the times in your own life where you've felt both. They recognized and said to us that they recognize that they do have short attention spans, but that's not a bad thing, that's just a different thing. That their brains work and process information differently due to technology and due to the scanning mode in which brains now have to work to engage technology. That they have a number of opportunities and that commitments compete for their time. That they need hands-on interactive learning, not lecture-based. And that they want to be engaged in social justice issues as a way of deepening their faith formation. The next slide. The vocabulary and language that is changing in our church. Church language is no longer understood by a majority of people. All you need to do is to have people in a room of newcomers recite the Lord's Prayer without providing some sort of prompting for that and see how well that goes for you. And in the same way, Christian education itself is a term that has been changing. And we are shifting now to newer ways of articulating. We used to talk about Sunday school, and then we moved to talking about Christian education because we wanted to bring the best education principles from public schools and from other schools into the church, the way people learn, how they learn. And now we're expanding that to talk less about the didactic ways of learning to more the forming of faith as being an experiential learning. The next slide, the United Church of Canada talked about these different definitions of Christian education. That people who use this term take seriously new developments in educational theory that can be applied to the Christian education task. Next slide. Faith formation, however, signals a desire to differentiate from a school model and view that faith is limited to ideas and doctrines or practices that we need to learn and pass along to others, but more as an understanding that faith is being shaped and actively shaping our lives in terms of the total environment. It's happening at church, at home, in our families, and in our experience of the world. And then the next is to talk about spiritual formation. And in the Spiritual Formation Alliance, they talk about their work as being that they don't have a dog in this fight because they talk about spiritual-led conversations in which they don't have a program or a doctrine that they're trying to sell, but instead everyone brings into the room with the experience their understanding of spirit. So there is no right or wrong way in that interpretation. Excellent. So we have been adopting a language shift in our own life in the United Church of Christ, talking less about Christian education and talking more about faith formation and spiritual formation is what we are really after. If we could step back just one slide. The fourth, intergenerational and family-centered movements. We used to think that in church life we had to compete for members' time, and if we could have a program that people would give up time in their week to come spend it in the church building, that we were being successful. And now perhaps we don't need people to, in a competitive time environment, to think that all faith formation needs to happen within the church itself. And we are returning again to the practices of faith that can be done by you yourself in your home, or you yourself with the other members of your family. So what would it be like to experiment for 1 week in your family to pray before every meal? Just 1 week. You don't have to commit to do it. No right, no wrong. We're not saying that it's a good habit or a bad habit. We just want you to practice that. And then come back and we'll see, let's talk about how that felt. Did it feel weird? Did it feel helpful? Did you like it? Did it feel, warm your heart? What did you do? I know a pastor in Cleveland who during Lent said she was going to take on the spiritual practice of wearing a clergy collar for the entire time of Lent. And if you knew this person, she's not a clergy collar wearing kind of preacher. And so she wanted to reflect on the experience of that, and she kept a journal of what it felt like to always be identified as a clergy person, and always identified as a Christian person, and always identified as a clergy woman wearing a clergy collar, and just sort of what that experience felt like. And she invited a group of people within the church to meet with her and to just talk about that Sunday after church of her experience. And she invited other people to sort of take on a different practice in which they could reflect on together. That's not something that says we're going to do that Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. It's something we're going to do in our daily lives and experiment together. Next one. So emphasizing learning across the lifespan, highlight 4 key faith practices. The need for caring conversations with one another. Some sense of devotion, paying reverence. This may not be in the traditional form of devotions like we think of a daily devotional, but some sense of giving reverence in your life. And to acts of service or justice. And then the rituals and traditions that sort of form around our family life. And the last of the things that we've learned from our faith formation research is that we are being impacted by finances. that money is an issue that is driving much of this conversation. That we no longer have the same sort of system within the church. Skip ahead and take this here. The decreasing funds have been a factor in the ways in which we do work in the church that help us, that are driving the ways in which we have to envision faith formation differently. The loss of income affects paid church staff positions who were once devoted to doing this kind of work. We no longer have designated conference staff positions for people who are charged with helping congregations do faith formation. Available resources for congregations have been diminishing. And money is certainly diminishing our morale and our sense of effectiveness and vitality in the church. And creativity is an issue that actually, it may be reinforcing our need to become more creative in the ways in which faith formation is being done. So now that I've sort of given you an overview of what we've been talking about through our faith formation research, I want to see how this is resonating with you. There are two real questions. How have you observed or experienced these shifts in your congregation? I'm going to pass around the mic to hear in the last several years the ways faith formation is changed or has been changing. And in what ways are these dynamics, technology, generational differences, vocabulary, family-centered movements, or financial issues driving the ways in which things are changing in your life?
So,
Jim's going to help with a cordless mic.
Technology has really helped us. But what? Oh, with paperwork.
Facebook.
Facebook.
I find that we get, one way that we really find it, we get kind of stuck is at the beginning of worship. Worship is the only time that we all kind of gather together. And there's always folks who want everybody to be quiet, don't say anything, and kind of sit and get in this spiritual zone. And then there's all these, folks that want to share what's been going on during the week and announcements, 20 minutes. So, oh my gosh, maybe worship will last an hour and 5 minutes instead of an hour. We keep running into those things.
What I find is the building feels more problematic because we have a sloping, and if suddenly I bring in technology, it's like, oh, I have to figure out where to screen, and now I have to block the windows, we don't have that, and we have pews, we can't shape the chairs. So some of the changes we need to make, that I want to make, I'm finding it's much more burdensome because of the building we've been given, and we're now asking big questions about that.
So we use technology every Sunday, and what we have found is we have a remote control screen, not really big. So if we need the traditional banner, those artists that have spent years, the Women's Fellowship, those banners can still be up, and the remote control screen just slowly comes down over it. But what it's done is allowed technological artists to have ministry in creating visuals and PowerPoints and artistry every Sunday, which in turn has become more important than the traditional banners. It's totally opened up our music program. The elderly love it. Hymnals are too heavy. They don't like holding them. The print in the UCC hymnals too small. They love having music and words up on the screen.
He's my pastor. So I took great hope from the statement, increased use of technology is strongly related to the congregation being characterized by willingness to meet new challenges. And we are adding new members, and we do have a sense of momentum, I believe, and I believe it's all part of what we're doing.
Behind you, Jim.
Hi, thank you for your presentation so far. I'm a little like you. I've spent 15 years in the parish and now I'm not. And one of the things I think I've learned more about faith formation is that most of it's happening beyond what you've been describing, which is not those rare occasions when we're at the building church with other fellow members at the same time, but when we're out in the world, spending the rest of our week, that's when our faith is really being formed through things like reflection and action and so on. And I think that one of the guidelines that most churches still fail to recognize is that practice of faith formation in the world being what really cements our faith. And when we're with each other, faith is kind of easy.
I work with youth, and I often feel like the rabbis, after the destruction of the temple, I'm not quite sure my youth are like a people traveling without a temple, and they have no Sabbath in their lives, and they have really bought culture's message that a higher SAT score will save them, getting into the right college will save them. And I sometimes feel this great sadness that they have had so little way to connect with the other message that we have to offer in our tradition. So when you talked about the 25 stories, Barnabas Borg's idea, I mean, they just haven't heard them. Maybe they've been in church, maybe they haven't, but they haven't heard them and taken them in. Maybe because society is just saying this other thing, affluence, appearance, achievement. But anyway, it's my experience in today's world.
That might be one of the values of an intergenerational time, to actually talk about maybe 25 is too many to do, but say if you're going to preserve 5 stories, what stories would you want to preserve? And to have, folks, the youth that you work with, talk about, an extra biblical, God is still speaking, so the extra biblical type text that really speaks to them, and then to hear from an older member of the church talk about, the parable of the Good Samaritan or some other story, and to actually experience the importance of those stories in each person's life. So I think even breaking beyond the biblical text is an idea.
I know that this for our church is not unique, but it's important for us that our pastor feels that he can share the pulpit. He doesn't always have to be there. And I know there are others that are along with that. And what's happened in our years, my wife and I, with many years with our pastor, over 15 years, that now it's open to people sharing, lay people sharing very often their faith journey. And this for us is very helpful.
Sure is. The church I was pastor of in Kentucky, we suspended our traditional forms of church membership, and so we didn't do it the way you're supposed to do it. And we had a covenant time in which it was done every year, and we had a group of people write a covenant for the year, and then people starting in Pentecost Sunday through World Communion Sunday, would make a discernment time as to whether they were going to sign the covenant again. And some people had signed for 5 years and then took a year off and then signed back up the next year. And it was a real process of discernment of, is this a community that I want to be a part of? And as a part of that, every Sunday during that about 4-month span, members presented their own addendums to the covenant. So if people said, I want to covenant that I'm going to spend more time getting to know people's names in the church, and I'm going to spend more time in the kitchen than I have been here to washing dishes. And that's going to be my covenant. And people, just that real sense of sharing and that I'm committed to this group of people was a way that people had never experienced what it meant to be membered together as a community, and made membership so much more real to us.
Somewhat nurtured by the early years of the UCC evangelism communication work, and also being involved with media literacy through both the Fig Tree and the Conference News, I work to share stories about people, how people are working to put their faith into action and to help them articulate the connection of their action and their faith. Because we have a major disconnect. Our society never asks, our media never asks people that they're interviewing, are you doing that because of your faith? They always leave out the faith question. Nobody ever asks the faith question. And pointedly, I ask that faith question, and people welcome it, and then it helps other people who read the Fig Tree or see the videos to be able to articulate their own faith and not to be afraid. I think we tend to be, well, we've got to leave it to the professionals. And there may be an interest in having more lay involvement and participation, but we've also got to have models of how we do that and what questions we ask so that we can share. I think that the major media would look at the Fig Tree and say, oh, that's advocacy media. And I say any media is advocacy. It's what are you advocating?
Back.
What did you say?
Very back.
I'm going to go over there.
I've got mine too.
I'll share. The use of technology has provided a means to bring speakers into the sermon on Sundays from the internet, whether it's YouTube or Justice and Witness Ministries last year had webinars that are recorded, and you can play little clips and bring the whole congregation into these conversations through the use of media. Or one of my favorite is the Living the Questions resource, and having Text Sample tell his own story rather than having to retell a story from Text Sample, and get away with how Text tells the story, which I couldn't do sometimes. So it brings the whole congregation into the moment, and with the intergenerational congregation, it creates a bridge by doing things like that.
If you were General Synod in Tampa, we did during our worship service invited prayers on Facebook for people to do that. And on the large screens that were going on during worship, those were coming in real time as people were offering their prayers. I know many churches have also started developing, even though on their own Facebook page you can interact, of course, at any time, but they've encouraged to say, let's gather Tuesday at 7 for a posed question of the evening. And a question will be posed, and then right then you can sort of have a robust conversation in the moment. But then the beauty of the technology is if you weren't there, you can come later and you can join in the conversation. If you're 30 minutes late, as some laggers, some can stay on. But you have a sense that we were together in a moment in time, but it doesn't have to stop at the time in which we all go home.
My name is Margaret, and I work with 6th through 12th grade. And I don't know that this is offering anything. I'm just sharing something that I've hit, is that our youth are so bombarded on Facebook that they don't respond anymore. That is like no longer helpful. So I struggle with how to reach them in a way that's meaningful and not just trying to catch them everywhere, but that's what I feel like I'm doing right now is like, here's an email, here's a Facebook message, and here's a text and a phone call. But I don't know. But I know other youth workers who have active Facebook pages, and that's the only way to reach them. And then, so I don't know what that means, but I think it's important to not do technology for the sake of doing technology, and to really try to meet the needs and understand what those needs are. And that's just a question that I'm asking, is how do I reach them in a way that really speaks to them? Because Facebook is not responding. And many kids, right now we're doing mission trip signups, and many kids will say, oh yeah, I've seen that kind of floating on Facebook. But it's not until I call them and I say, hey, I'm hoping you're gonna sign up. And then they're like, oh yeah, I gotta do that. And it happens just like that. So I think the thing that I shouted out was relationships that forms. And I think that more than anything, if our youth or anybody, if we're forming relationships, that personal ask is the biggest, I think, so.
Oh no, you get to talk.
I'm going to respond fairly directly to that, since I spend my life in social media. We started with 4 basic things that we should be about, and one of those is caring communication. Caring communication is something that happens for you, not to you. And that if we're using social media to push an agenda and push communication, that's not how communication works.
Yep.
Communication works when it's being pulled. So if you are filling a hunger, filling a need, and providing this as a way to do that, it will work. If it's obvious that you care and you're caring for and with somebody instead of caring to them, then it will be helpful. And when we use social media to say, there, I said it, so I'm done, and now I said it again, and now I said it again, well, of course people are ignoring you, because you've proven worthy of that. And so just simply changing your stance and attitude to being one of caring communication, and ask the question, if I were really wanting to get you what you need from the church, from the youth group, from the thing, what's the best way to communicate with you, not to you? And you'll get an answer.
Well, I just wanted to share that I'm interning at a very small church. We have maybe 20 people in the congregation. But one of the younger people decided they wanted to start projecting things. And they brought in their Mac laptop. And fortunately, the pastor was very supportive. And so it's been interesting to watch what happened. But part of it was that there was someone who wanted to be involved. And so instead of working toward youth, it was actually the youth coming forward and wanting to do something as a gift. And so I found that really, really exciting. And so watching what's happened as they've started going to the point where now it's every Sunday. And watching the excitement in the people that were involved, it also kind of evolved into now we also do this donut hour before the church. And so people weren't coming for a Bible study or a Sunday school, but now they'll come and talk about their spirituality at the table eating donuts. And then come upstairs, which was also nice when we had visitors who got to come in and visit with people before they came upstairs. So it's just been interesting to see what's happening with this little church as it's kind of struggling but beginning to grow.
I'm coming. My exercise program here. Hi, I'm Andy. Let's see, I was just thinking about the word fun, and kind of building off of what Margaret said a little bit, and relationships, and I think about the church, maybe before I was born and into the early part of when I was born, and it was a center of fun. It's like it's where you went to make things happen, and now it's the places that I see that are vibrant churches are still they have a lot of interesting activities going on. I think my experience with working with kids it's a pretty different setting than I work at the hospital, so a different setting than in the church, but my experience with working with kids is that they want to first build trust and relationships through fun, through getting to know you, doing something that's maybe more superficial, but is a good time. And so I think the more ways that we can provide that's the way to start. Oh, I'm coming. You guys have all planned this. One side of the room, all idea.
Okay, you guys are next.
Well, as I sit here and listen to this, I just feel the need to share what came out of our confirmation class when we invited them to design a holiday. Like, what would you, in the sense of Holy Day, what would you do? What event would you create that would express your spirituality or something that you would need? and they had this 2-hour process, and then they said, well, it'd be a 3-day event because we have 3 main needs. Okay? And it would involve 3 pairs of clean, adorable pajamas because you would only be in pajamas. So you get in your pajamas and you have a 24-hour slumber party with your friends. You get all your wiggles out. You watch every movie, you eat junk food, and you play video games. Second day is recovery day, where you do physically healthy stuff, where you exercise, you eat healthy, and you sleep well. And then the third day is prayer and journaling and discerning for your life. And you do this once a year. And I thought, I totally want to do that. So I actually feel like we should have a pajama day. First, go to the mall and buy 3 cool pajamas, and then proceed.
Becky, that sounds like a great retreat.
I know, I know.
Let's do it. I'm in.
Okay, I think that's it.
Right in front of you.
Oh, right in front of me.
Hi, I'm Lauren. Hi, Ben. I'm wondering if you could just go back 2 slides. I think it was the 4 key faith practices, learning across the lifespan when we're thinking about intergenerational. I think those flew by for me at least. It's one more back maybe. Or do you have a word for us on those 4 key practices?
What do you want?
Is it that one?
Is it that one?
That's what I was on.
On these 4? Elaborate? I think I think that we think that in church life that there's a lot of things happening when we're having fun, when we're learning, when we're processing, when we're all doing that, that we need to be engaged in, I guess, theological reflection about what is actually happening here in the midst of what we are doing. And so providing that space for the caring conversation where people can reflect on what that experience meant for them. And that, I'm not doing a very good job here, but in the sense of, well, when I was a local church pastor, and I was a student pastor all the time that I was in seminary, and I was very young. I went straight from college into seminary. And so I did something like weird every Sunday with my church people, particularly at night. And I remember asking all of my church members to be prepared to come and to take off their shoes. And I was in rural Kentucky, and they all thought we were going to have a foot washing. So I heard word that they weren't going to come because we were going to have foot washing. And I said that was not my intention at all. I just kind of wanted to have sort of the slumber party sort of mode where we actually sort of talked to one another. And I found that in this experience of rural church life where people supposedly knew one another, that they had such a context of not creating spaces for caring conversations that really took them to a deeper level in which someone had really asked them to go deeper in the friendships. And I remember the way that was around Christmas time, and I remember giving a box to people and asking people to bring it back filled with things that would fit in the box that would represent them, and to do object lessons talking about the gifts of themselves to the community. And one woman bringing in that box a watch that her mother had been wearing when she got hit by a train and died. And the clock stopped, the watch stopped at the time of her mother's death. She brought this to share, and she had never had a time, because they were all chit-chatting all the time, that they never had an occasion where it felt safe to kind of tell that traumatic experience in her life. And if people knew about it, they didn't know about the wristwatch, because she never felt safe to do that. And I still wonder to this day, perhaps she put it in the box and wonder if she would actually get up the nerve to actually tell about it, so the space was there. So to kind of create the places for that caring conversation. We lost our slide, but the
Devotion. Devotion, service, and ritual.
And in the same way, sort of this sense of devotion or ritual or traditions, that it's been my experience in church life, and perhaps that's one of the beautiful moments of this opportunity where we have people who are not so engaged in church life anymore, to actually explain what we are doing and what it means, and to kind of talk about the purple paraments versus the white paraments, and to talk about what it is we're doing when we're singing the doxology. All of those sort of things become opportunities so that everything becomes a canopy for theological reflection. And that's really the move away from Sunday school to faith formation. It's saying we're not going to do theological reflection for an hour on Sunday morning. We're going to take all of our experiences and then gather them together and to provide a safe space where faith formation can happen. And we are past our time. Just to end at 3:53. Thank you so much. I hope this has been a good time to share. And this is not my expertise. I was asked to do a workshop on Beyond Sunday School, so this is my first experience.